Greetings from Mesa View United Methodist Church of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. Our traditional service is at 8:30 a.m. and at 11 a.m. we gather for contemporary worship. More information may be found at our website, mesaviewumc.com. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
Our gospel reading this morning comes from Mark 5, verses 1 through 20. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man came out of the tombs with an unclean spirit and met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains were wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine. Let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and the country. Then the people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demonic sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demonic and to the swine reported it. They then began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and what mercy he has shown to you." And he went away and began to proclaim to the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So if you've not already been using your blue scripture insert, I invite you to take it out. On the back is a place to write things to remember from today's service. Last week we heard the parable of the prodigal son, and the son goes off to a Gentile area, an unclean area for Jews, and that's where he does his dissolute living. And just to emphasize how unclean it is, we're told he ends up working with pigs, an ultimate humiliation for a Jew, which that plays a significant role then in what it means to be welcomed back into the Father's house. Today's passage is also about ritual impurity, but more importantly about Jesus' reaction to it. Jesus has crossed the Sea of Galilee, and as they're making their way at night, a huge storm comes up. Most of you remember this story. Jesus slips through it, and the disciples are terrified, and they wake him up and say, "Aren't you concerned? We're all going to die here." And Jesus calms the storm. He overcomes the effects of the forces of nature, water being a sign of chaos in the ancient world. And so it's one of the signs of what Jesus is able to do and the power he controls. Just as the miracle of the healing of the woman with the issue of blood and the raising of Jairus' daughter who has died, which are the two miracles that take place immediately after the passage we just heard, also about his power of dealing with those who are unclean. So Jesus gets out of the boat and he goes to the area of the town of Gerasene, where he immediately meets this man known as the Gerasene demoniac. But Mark wants us to be very clear about this man in relationship to Judaism. He's in a Gentile land, unclean. He lives among the tombs. We're not told this just once, but 3 times Mark tells us he lives amongst the tombs, unclean. He lives near pigs, unclean. But the man is not only surrounded by this uncleanness, but he's also possessed by demons. Unclean demons, we are told. He is alienated from everyone and everything, including, in a view, he's alienated from God. He's about as far from God as you can get. Everything about this says this is not someone who's religious. This is not the person you're going to want to be near. Which is why he lives not in the town, but in the graveyard. Everyone is sort of given up on this man. The best modern analogy is this is the man who's homeless, we might encounter on the streets. He's ranting and raving. Maybe the words don't even make any sense, and you see him, and you're like, not only do I want to cross the street, I might actually go to the next street over. This is not the person we want to be around. And neither did the people who are there. And we're told that they tried to contain him with change, which was keeping him from harming himself, but everything they did was ineffective. And so they've just given up. They're just letting him be out there, this unnamed man, to deal with his own demons, and no one has anything to do with him. He's the one that no one wants to talk about. Why can't they just go away? Why can't he just stay in the tombs and leave us good people alone? And he's clearly separated from God, at least the way we understand God and cleanliness. At least that's what everyone thinks. And so there's a couple other key points to this story. And we can go through as we look at healing stories and guess what physical ailments people have. But this is really the only healing that Jesus does in which not a physical ailment, but clearly seems to be a mental illness that this man is dealing with. And again, we could try to make some diagnoses of him. Maybe he has schizophrenia, maybe he has something else, but it's not really as important as recognizing how Jesus responds to him and how Jesus treats him. This clearly unclean man from a Jewish perspective. So just recognizing that, and again, Mark wants us to be very clear how unclean he is. The devout religious would want to stay away from him, because they would become ceremonially impure themselves just by touching him or coming close to him. But the man comes up to Jesus and he bows down to him, worships Jesus. And Jesus says, "What is your name?" What is your name? There's something about mental illness that makes it an anonymous illness. It's something we don't want to talk about either for ourselves or if it happens in our families. We want to keep it at a distance. We don't want anyone to know that's happening with our family. That's true even though 1 in 5 adults will experience some form of mental illness in any given year. In 1 in 25 adults, that mental illness will severely impact their ability to live their life. But we keep that as a secret shame. And so naming that is one way we begin to deal with it. To bring it out of the tombs, out of the uncleanliness, out into the light of the world. Because naming something makes a difference in how we relate to it. That homeless man who's just out there ranting and raving is just somebody else. But once we know his or her name, there's a difference in how we relate to them. And so this morning we're going to talk about mental illness. And we're going to hear from someone willing to name his illness for us.
I'm Johnny Zabalza. I've had mental illness since I was a little kid. And the doctors told me that that's impossible, because an onset of bipolar and schizophrenia doesn't come until your late teens, early 20s. But that's just as that happens. What they're saying is true, but that's not true for everybody. Because my sister and I used to see things all the time, and then my brother came along, and it was the same thing for him. And my dad, it was the same thing for him. And so, anyway, long story short, I ended up over here in New Mexico, and I went to a pilot program in 1986, which took me into the main hospital, and they told me that I was bipolar and schizoaffective, which is a form of schizophrenia. And I started going into the hospital, and then I lost count after 22 times that I went. Well, I used to see things, there was, like that one time I saw a little man, a little old man that I knew in my head. I go, what's this? And then later on in life, I knew what it was. It's just something that I was seeing. When I say I'm going to the poke, that means I'm going into the hospital. I could feel it. Sometimes it's so powerful in me, I need help. And I go and I get the help, and then I come back out. And when I get out, it takes 7 to 10 days to get back to what kind of normal. But still, I'll go back to the main thing, and that's Jesus. And what's cool about this interview is that it reminded me of a time where my wife and I, and Billy Isadora, he's a musician, and Karen Lafferty that wrote that song, Seek Ye First, and we sang together, and each of us did a song on our own, and I sang a song that God gave me one year, You Were Loved on the Cross Where Jesus Died. And before I did that, I gave a testimony of my mental illness. And so it was really, really cool how the Lord worked there. I sang the song, and I knew that was going to be the last song of the evening. They were going to have a sit-down dinner. And before I could sit down, this lady came up to me and goes, that was a beautiful song. But what was better than the song was what you said. What you did and what you said gave me hope, because my brother has the same thing you have. And it threw me for a second, and I go, well, if it helped, man, I think that's wonderful.
Now, I could be wrong, but I think this is the only time that Jesus asks someone their name before he heals them. Everyone else has taken this man's identity from him. They've excluded him from society. And many of the commentaries on this passage say his humanity has been taken from him. Not only I think that's sort of an overstatement, but that is sort of what we do with people who are dealing with mental illness. Rather than seeing them as human, as just like us, we want to push them aside. Some because out of fear that it brings something close to home for us. And so if we can keep it at a distance, certainly it won't affect us. We separate them from normal society. We count ourselves as normal, and they're the ones who have the problem. For me, this story also hits close to home because of mental illness in my own family. My last name by birth is not actually Nash, it's Schroeder. Schroeder was an adopted name given to my grandfather. He was adopted by the Schroeder family in an extremely abusive household. He ran away at the age of 14 and never looked back. And the story we were told when we were growing up was that his mother had died during childbirth, and his father was an officer in the Navy and couldn't therefore keep him, and so he was given up from adoption. But in doing a genealogical look-up of our family, we found that story was actually not true. That looking back from 100 years, it appears that his mother probably had schizophrenia or some other mental disorder, and at the age of 7 said she no longer wanted him in the house. And so he was given up for adoption to this abusive family. So he told my father, you know, if you'd like to change your name, feel free to do, because I have no allegiance to that name. My father never did, but he told that story to us, and so I have two other brothers. We all changed our last name. My middle brother and I going back to a family name of Nash. But it's not just there. My grandmother, my father's mother, died as a patient in the state mental hospital in Arizona. And my father also deals with mental illness, unmedicated and untreated by doctors. He'll occasionally go seek assistance and get on medicine. He'll feel good for a while and then think, oh, I'm done. And he'll go off the medicine and go right back to his regular behavior. Which is obviously the opposite of what needs to happen. And so Johnny has a similar experience.
I'm in God's hands, and also I got some good professional help. I have an amazing therapist. I have an amazing psychiatrist, an amazing, I forgot how you could call her, a primary doctor. And then at the primary doctors, there's psychiatrists, there's psychologists, there's people that tell you where you to go do certain things. This is where you go, and I'm just covered. The medicine that I take, it's not a cure-all at all, but it keeps me day by day, just depending on the day, but pretty much day by day, staying out of the hospital. I could make it on just doing what I'm supposed to do. It means rest and sleep right, which I do. And you know, I just excuse me. I just know that the medication is a must, so I can't miss it. You know, one time I did that back in the 90s. I don't need the medicine. I just came off it. And before I knew it, I was talking to a nurse. It was at 12 midnight, and she says, well, just take your medicine. I said, well, I've been off it for 2 days. And she goes, that's okay. Take your medicine. And I did, and I felt normal again, you know.
So Johnny talks about mental illness running in his family as well. There is some indication that there is some genetic disposition to mental illness, but there are also environmental factors that play a role. So just because you might not have mental illness in your family doesn't mean that you can't deal with the issues that come up. It could be PTSD, could be depression. There's many different ways that it manifests itself. And if you have it in your family, you need to be aware of it as well. Obviously, you know, with my own family history, it's something I worry about for myself. I certainly worry about for my girls, how it might manifest itself there. I've gone to counseling several times for things that were happening in my life. But we have to name it. In order to deal with it, you have to name it. You have to say what it is in order to try to get help. And that's the second step. Name it first. Second is to seek help. And that's what this man does. Is as soon as he sees Jesus coming off the boat, he runs up to Jesus seeking help. Now it appears that the demons, it is an exorcism story, don't want to, they're quite happy with the way things are going, but the man has some volition in this as well, and seeking Jesus to do something. So Jesus says, what is your name? And he says, Legion, for we are many. And there's lots of speculation about what that might mean. Maybe, you know, there's multiple demons, or he's dealing with multiple issues in his life, which is true for most of us. There's some speculation this might also be a reference to the Roman military, that the legion who was stationed in the Decapolis, this area, these 10 cities, actually had a boar, a pig, on their shields. And so there could be a sort of hidden metaphor here of, you know, the Jews God kicking out the Roman authorities and having this herd of swine run into the water. And I can understand why the swineherd gets upset, the herders get upset by what takes place here. But last week I said I didn't have time, as we talked about addiction, to allow those who are giving their testimony to talk about how prayer played such a crucial role, not only in them getting clean, but in staying clean, and a crucial role it played in their families' lives as well. But I know that prayer is central to Johnny's spirituality, and so I asked him, how does prayer relate as you deal with your mental illness?
I think it does probably help because when you're praying for somebody, you're not thinking about what's going on in your brain. And so the prayer always keeps my mind off of the illness. Always, always. If I ain't praying for somebody, that little critter will start to show itself, but the prayer is what's really helped me a lot. Even in the hospital. In the hospital, I pray for a lot of people. And Reverend Jerry Lightwine told me one time when she was visiting me, she goes, "Do you pray for people?" I go, "Yeah." Out loud? I go, "Sometimes." I think you have a hospital ministry, not just on the outside, when I tell you to go see somebody, but also on the inside. And I did not want to hear that. So all of a sudden, a couple of years went by. I was at Haven Hospital, and I saw myself laying hands on everybody that was there, and everybody that saw me asked me to lay hands on one of the guys. That he would tell me, "You need to pray for that lady over there." I said, "Okay." So I'd pray for her, and then he was like the last person I did pray for. And he said, "Johnny," I said, "Yes, can you pray for me?" I go, "Of course." I forgot about him. I know that's what happened. So I prayed for him. He said, "Thank you so much." And he was sick. He was really physically sick, as well as mentally sick. So, in and out or in, it's all God. That's all I can say. It's all God.
After the man is healed, he begs Jesus to let him go with him and the disciples. That should be contrasted with the other people who are begging Jesus to leave. And if you were here when we looked at the Gospel of Mark and the story Mark tells, that's exactly the response that Jesus wants, is for people to pick up their cross and to follow. But here, Jesus doesn't let the man follow. Instead, he says, "Go back and tell your friends what God has done for you." And so the man goes away and becomes an evangelist, proclaimer of the good news. And apparently it works, because later in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus goes back to this area, and 4,000 people gather to hear him speak. The man has told others what God has done. And so when it comes to dealing with mental illness, the same is true. The more we bring it out of the darkness, the more we talk about it, the more we name it, the better off we will all be. And so I asked Johnny, what would you say to those who are dealing with mental illness?
Yeah, if there's anybody out there that's having a problem, come and see me. I've had different people over the years. I was getting ready to sing a song. One time I was getting ready to sing a song, "Giving Glory to My King," and I gave a small testimony of my mental illness, and this lady after church came up to me. I thought I was the only one. So I hope this interview helps somebody.
So some of you may have seen the story this week in the Journal or on the news about a promising student and baseball player at El Dorado High School who committed suicide. And I worked with several of the families who are affiliated with this congregation this week, who played baseball with him. And we talked about where is God in the midst of this. And we talked about mental illness and the role it plays in leading to suicide. And we would not blame somebody for dying of cancer, so we don't blame someone for dying of mental illness. And I told them, especially as, jocks in high school, where being a man is everything, that trying to say you can control it all, you can hold it all in, of being afraid to tell others that sometimes things are going wrong that you can't deal with them, and that you're struggling or you're having a hard time coping with what life is dealing you, not telling others is not strength. Telling others requires enormous strength. Not telling others is weakness. Not being able to say, I need help, requires enormous strength. Or being able to say to God, I can't deal with this by myself. Or being able to say that same thing to others, of saying, I need somebody to talk to. Because hope is possible when we begin to name what we need. So if you've dealt with mental illness, if you have a family member who's dealing with mental illness issues, let us go forth and share the good news of what God is doing for us, and what the medical community is doing, of what is possible. Let's bring it out of the darkness. Let's not have it to be a taboo subject that's not touched or talked about. Certainly not in church would you ever talk about mental illness, so that everybody who's dealing with that then thinks that they're alone, that they're the only one. But they're not alone. And they do not need to suffer alone. That God is with them, and that help is possible, and that hope is possible. I pray that it will be so, my brothers.